Can Rick and Morty open your mind? Welcome back to Nerdist News, I'm Dan Casey, and today we're breaking down the latest episode of Rick and Morty. Titled Wet Kuat Amortican Summer, the 7th episode of Season 7 puts the spotlight on Summer for a change, and she has a lot to get off her chest, which will make more sense after you've seen the episode.
Okay, no, not what Frolf is about.
It's another story that explores body horror, messy family dynamics, and questions of identity in equal measure. Mostly, it wants you to open your mind! And we're gonna break it all down for you in just a moment, but to do so, we have to spoil what happens. So if you haven't seen it yet and you're worried about that sort of thing, leave now before it's too late.
It's my emotional cheat day. I am removing myself from this conversation.
Okay, let's get into it, shall we? Folks, since time immemorial, mankind has looked to the stars and wondered, when will someone mash up the hormonal summer camp silliness of Wet Hot American Summer with the psychic mutant Quado from Total Recall?
That's up to Quado.
Well, folks, Rick and Morty has done it at long last in Wet Kuat Amortican Summer.
Oh my god, what the f***?
It's an episode about many things: complicated sibling relationships, the ecstatic joy and body horror of having a Quado, and what we're willing to justify in the pursuit of silencing our own insecurities. More specifically, it touches on how opening one's mind to the emotional prisons we build for ourselves is almost as radical and freeing as leading a revolution on Mars, despite being just a little guy, just a tiny little psychic guy, just a little guy in my chest. And speaking of that little guy, Quado is at the heart of this episode.
Dude, no way! Summer's got a Quado!
A what-o?
Now, for those who don't know, Summer, Quado is the psychic mutant who leads the Martian resistance in the 1990 film Total Recall. He's attached to his twin brother George's abdomen and utters the phrase, "open your mind," when accessing Douglas Quaid's memories. Although, now knowing that Morty was saying it as a cry for help, we might have to rewatch that scene in a brand new light.
Open your mind.
Open your mind!
The film itself is an adaptation of Philip K. Dick's 1966 short story, We Can Remember It For You Wholesale, but Quado is actually an original creation for the movie. According to David Hughes' book, Tales from Development Hell, Quado and the other mutants of Mars were wholesale inventions of David Cronenberg.
Boy, Morty, I really Cronenberged the world up, didn't I? We got a whole planet of Cronenbergs walking around down there, Morty.
He came onto this project to write and direct in 1984. Now, mind you, development on the movie began way back in 1974. It didn't come out till 1990. It underwent many different iterations, or should we say mutations, along the way. Cronenberg left the project over creative differences, but Quado survived to see the light of day. Sadly, though, neither Quado nor David saw Richter at the party.
See you at the party, Richter!
Now, oddly enough, this marks the second Quado appearance of the season. Rick Prime had a little Quado of his own during the gadget-filled showdown with Rick C-137 in Episode 5 on Mort Ricken. It's also the second time this season that two members of the family have been fused together thanks to one of Rick's inventions gone awry. The Jarek trap introduced us to the Dr. Manhattan-esque Jericki, a detached amalgam of Jerry and Rick that tried to transcend humanity by abandoning all sense of self and emotional attachments.
Do you not hear the symphony of atoms dying in space?
Wet Kuat Amortican Summer takes a different tack by reminding us of one of the show's core theses. Despite our immense and often cosmic loneliness, our relationships are what help to anchor us and reinforce our individuality. It's most often exemplified by Rick. He pushes his friends and family away to embrace self-destructive nihilism and to chug his body weight in beer. But this time we see the toll it takes on Summer. This is the Summer of our discontent. This episode puts Summer under the microscope and tries to examine what makes her tick. Like so many of us in our teenage years, or even now, she's driven by a profound need to fit in, to raise her social status, and to make out with Glenn Powell, who voices the ultimately scummy trafficker, Quiet.
I'm quiet.
The episode takes a unique way into things with a riff on the Pip-Boy from the Fallout games. Using an attribute slider like in the game, Summer's able to min-max stats like strength, dexterity, charisma, and intelligence to optimize herself for any social situation.
Bro, is that your sister? Her dexterity is wild.
Yeah, I guess.
But like a proximity mine just behind a vault door when you're being chased by Mirelurks, Rick's sci-fi solution to their problems blows up in their faces. After emerging from a Quat Tub time machine, Summer and Morty find their sibling bond closer than ever, at least physically. It leads to one of the most unexpected outcomes. The Smith siblings have fused together, and Morty is now a psychic Quado-style mutant attached to Summer's body. Unlike Juricki, it's not a perfect union.
Holy sh! All the positive aspects of each perfectly melded together?
For Summer, it's emotional whiplash. She went from the most idealized version of herself possible, ripped, charismatic, and popular, to a state of absolute wretchedness, mutated, desperate, and publicly ridiculed for not knowing what a quado is.
Oh my god, she doesn't even know what a quado is.
I know what that is. I'm cool.
So which is the real Summer? Well, the answer is they all are. Within Summer exists multitudes, and a tiny little Morty who's braided with her central nervous system. But despite Morty's repeated exhortation to open her mind, Summer can't see past her own crushing self-doubt. If you've been watching our Rick and Morty breakdowns this season, you may recall that we heavily invoked the English writer Alan Watts to examine the Jarek Trap's conceptions of self and ego. This episode also called to mind another one of Watts' incisive observations which perfectly aligned with Summer's journey. In his 1966 book, The Book on the Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are, Watts wrote, "The most strongly enforced of all known taboos is the taboo against knowing who or what you really are behind the mask of your apparently separate, independent, and isolated ego." Here, Summer's masks are twofold. She wears the mask of her all-consuming ego, which leads her to take increasingly desperate steps to find acceptance among her peers. She also then wears the mask of Morty, or more specifically, Quado Morty. And it's unfair to call him a mask because he is a living, breathing, separate being. But she treats him like some kind of sentient Pokemon or a pocket Morty if you nasty. At first, he's a blemish, but then he becomes her golden ticket into a world of other cool, popular people willing to accept her and make Summer feel special. Of course, this turns out to have a darker side as well, which Morty desperately tries to warn her about, but Summer's too preoccupied with how she's perceived by the rest of the world to look inward and actually open her mind. It calls to mind another Watts quote from the book. Watts wrote, "Our whole knowledge of the world is, in one sense, self-knowledge. For knowing is a translation of external events into bodily processes, and especially into states of the nervous system and the brain. We know the world in terms of the body and in accordance with its structure." And that speaks to why Summer was unable to actually open her mind to Morty. I mean, she doesn't even know what a quado is.
A what-o?
How can she translate that bodily process into meaningful discovery?
This whole time I thought my brother was an anchor holding me back, but he's like a key to something I never even imagined.
It also connects back to the attribute slider at the outset of the episode. This ability to change oneself at a whim is a very tempting prospect for many of us. Both Summer and Morty had apparently been asking for one for a while, and the way it plays out offers a valuable insight into their relationship with their grandfather. Summer earns her attribute slider and other cool gadgets by doing gross sci-fi chores for Grandpa Rick. It's a transactional relationship, and it creates a deep-seated feeling of resentment between her and her grandfather and her brother. Case in point, Morty feels entitled to the attribute slider because he's been asking Rick for one for ages. Morty goes on countless adventures with Rick, and his grandpa usually does eventually give in and dote on his grandson in his own weird way.
So are you gonna— Yes, I'm gonna do it!
So seeing Summer get the gadget that he most desires is particularly galling. But it's equally frustrating for Summer. She feels like that she always has to work for Rick's attention and affection, whereas Morty gets it for free. And that's exacerbated by a moment earlier in the season that really stuck with me. When Summer came in to check on Rick and Air Force Wong, Rick blew up on her in a burst of misdirected anger. His defeated apology after she slammed the door is all he can muster.
Sorry.
Yet as we learn by the end of this episode, this is in part because Rick sees Summer for who she truly is. Not just a strong, independent woman who eats what she kills, but someone who reminds him of his dearly departed wife, Diane, Summer's grandmother. Rick holds Summer to a higher standard than Morty because he believes in her, even when she clearly doesn't always believe in herself. Like Rick, Summer also needed to internalize the idea that she is a worthwhile person and she has people who count on her. While it takes Summer a while to arrive at this idea, she does eventually get there and manages to save Morty's life in a pitch-perfect parody of Taken, complete with a bonus reference to Room 237 from The Shining to boot. By the episode's end, we see a different side of Summer, one who's comfortable in her own skin at last, or at least for the time being, because she opened her mind to the possibility that she doesn't have to be who she thinks other people want her to be.
Damn, Summer Smith. There is no end to your complexity.
Now, given the taken of it all, Morty's repeated command to open your mind could be taken a different way.
F***ing Christ, you bitch! I've been screaming for hours!
Just as Summer is unable to save Morty until she opens herself up to a connection she'd been stubbornly avoiding, the best way for us to resolve conflicts in the real world is to connect and open our minds to the reality around us. As a society, we tend to imagine that bad things are the sole responsibility of evil people. It helps to focus on cartoonishly evil caricatures or obviously bad actors because they're easier to rationalize and connect to horrible acts. What's harder to process is that it's almost never just one bad guy.
Oh, is that 3 or 4? I've lost count.
As exemplified by Rick's quest to track down Summer, there's a whole chain of good, well-intentioned, or regular people who enable these evil acts either directly or indirectly. Neither the taxi driver nor the bartender did anything inherently wrong, but they played their unwitting role in conveying Summer and Morty onto the conveyor belt of human trafficking that ultimately led to a real conveyor belt in Summer's case.
Arrivederci, bitch.
It's a tough pill to swallow because when bad things happen, we want to envision a giant evil organization like the black market gang of psychic Quado dealers, or the Squid Game parodying assholes in the post-credit scene as this masked, faceless amalgamation of evil and corruption. But as tends to be the case in real life, there usually isn't a giant, shadowy conspiracy. There's just a chain of people with good intentions who unwittingly perpetuate the cycle.
TMI, Michael.
You have a wife?
Anyway, folks, there you have it. That's everything you need to know about the latest episode of Rick and Morty. You can find all of our previous breakdowns over on Nerdist, and we'll be back next week to overthink things all over again. For now, though, tell us, what did you think of this episode? Did you spot anything that we missed?
Oh, Frisbee plus golf. I get it now.
Let us know in the comments below, and for the latest and greatest in the world of pop culture, make sure you stay tuned to Nerdist.com.